from Faculty Science, Social and Humanities, and under program Industrial Relation and Labor Studies. And
Okay.
actually, this interview session is a part of our assignments, learning with experts under subject comparative industrial relation.
Okay, great. Very happy.
So we have a question for you. And so let's start. Okay. So can you tell us what is the common issues that happening always in collective bargaining?
Common issues? Okay, so one common issue, I guess, is to figure out whether or not you want collective bargaining in the first place. So usually a trade union or a collective of workers will try to ask the employer for collective bargaining, to engage in collective bargaining. And usually it's with the aim of getting to an agreement, a collective agreement, that will apply for all the workers in a particular bargaining unit. So a bargaining unit can be a workplace, it could be a work unit, but it can also be multiple employers, so covering a whole industry. And in some countries you even have national agreements that cover not just one industry, but all workers in a country. So you have different levels of bargaining and different bargaining units. But the most common topic is that the bargaining parties will figure out whether or not they would like to engage with this kind of activity. Then the next topic is, of course, what to bargain over. So what do you want to bargain about? And the terms and conditions of employment is usually what you want to start off with. So wages being the obvious choice, right? So how much should the exercise of labor cost for the employer? So you try to define, okay, well, for 1 hour of work, how big should that price be, or how high should the price be, and there you go on from that. The other thing is, of course, working time. So how long should you work during a work week, or maybe a month or a whole year, and you decide how many hours that the employee should be available for the employer. So those would be the typical topics that you start off from. But collective agreements can vary in the scope of items that they cover, but also the depth of the items. So you can have collective agreements that cover a lot of scope. So wages, working time, vacation, pension, health and safety, training, all kinds of things like that. That would be the scope. But the other thing is the depth. So how detailed is the regulation? Is it a framework agreement where you're just setting out some basic principles, or do you have detailed regulation for a lot of the things you're talking about?
Oh, I see. Okay, and I have one question. That is any relationship between collective bargaining and politics randomly, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I'm a political scientist by training. So I think that there's a big connection between collective bargaining and politics. And when you do comparative employment relations, you realize that some countries regulate by law, and other countries regulate by collective agreements. So to give you an example, I am Danish, so in my country, in Denmark, trade unions and employers associations will set the terms of conditions of employment without any statutory regulation. So there will be very little statutory regulation. But in a country like France, there will be a big labor code set by politicians, and they will have detailed regulation in law. So if you start comparing countries, you realize that there's a big difference between the type of regulation that happens in the labor market. So I think that both collective bargaining and statutory regulation, they're both political in the sense that it's basically actors who are trying to, with their own interest, trying to get to agreements with people or actors with other interests, and thereby coming to some kind of agreement about how to regulate terms and conditions of employment.
And also, I want to ask, what do you think about the collective bargaining between US and other countries?
So collective bargaining, you mean inside the US or between the US and other countries?
Inside the US.
Inside the US. Okay. Yeah. So so collective bargaining in the US used to be very important, and trade unions used to cover a big share of the workforce. Today, it's in the private sector, it's only around 7% of the workforce that are covered by a collective agreement. So the U.S. has gone from being a system where you had a lot of collective bargaining to having very little. And today, collective bargaining in the U.S. is primarily at the enterprise level. So particular companies will be unionized, and in those enterprises, unions will work with management to set terms and conditions of employment. I can tell you that in the automotive industry, so car manufacturing, you still have unions that bargain with the employers, and quite recently, where I am in Michigan, we had a big strike between the UAW, the United Auto Workers, and General Motors. General Motors being one of the three big car manufacturing companies in the U.S. That strike lasted around 5 weeks and ended up with an agreement that has now been ratified by the workers, given substantial increases on wages, but also improvement of temporary workers' employment conditions. So collective bargaining, when it still exists in the U.S., is still vibrant. But coming back to your other question, you can say that unions, because they're unsuccessful in getting collective bargaining with employers, they've now increasingly turned to politicians to get statutory regulations, so legislation passed by either the federal government or state legislators on for stuff like the minimum wage.
I think that's all our question.
Yeah.
And anything else?
And do you have anything you want to share?
Want to share? With us?
No, just I wish you very good luck with your assignments. I'm very happy that you have taken an interest in comparative employment relations. So I just hope that you will do well with that and be successful with your studies.
Thank you so much,
sir. Thank you for willing to accept our invitation, and thank you for all information that you have been shared with us. Sir, can we take selfie?
Sure. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
On. Good. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Hello Prof, I am Mazna and this is my group members.
Hi, I'm Shahada.
Hi, I'm Norli.
Nice to see you, sir.
Before we proceed to our interview session, this interview is being recorded for our video assignment.
Yes, and for your information,
We are final year student from Faculty of Science, Social and Humanities under program Industrial Relation and Labour Studies.
And actually, this interview session is a part of our assignments, learning with experts under subject comparative industrial relation. So, we begin with our first question. Can you tell us what is the common issues that happening in collective bargaining?
After that, we want to ask you, is there any relationship between collective bargaining and politics randomly in your opinion? And also, I would like to know what do you think about the collective bargaining?
Day, you see,
Collective
boleh tak
bargaining
cakap?
between collective bargaining